Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklen podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world one character at a time. But right now, I'm teaching Zettelkasten. And this podcast is for you, Roy, with a shout out to you, Chris. So we're going to dive in today to a question that came up in a conversation with Roy. And he is a history buff, and he had some questions about the structure of a Zettelkasten. And I wanted to share with you kind of an overview of where Zettelkasten gets its structure, how it's structured, and the decisions that you have under your control that affect its structure. So without further ado, let's head on over to the down-facing camera, and I'll show you what I mean. See you there. Okay, here we are with our down-facing camera where we can look at some cards. We're talking about the structure of a Zettelkasten. Is it a tree or is it a network? And is it hierarchical in nature? So let's dive in and take a look. The first thing I'd like to point out is that every entry point into your Zettelkasten, whether it be from a category or from dynamically generated categories without any predefined categories, each entry point is the head of a small tree, and they're independent of one another. In other words, every category and every dynamically discovered category is like a completely separate tree. If they weren't indexed, they'd never find each other. So, is a Zettelkasten like a tree, or is it more like a forest? Well, links are going to be more productive than new entry points. New entry points lead to isolations, and that's the opposite of what you want to have with a Zettelkasten. So even if you're using dynamically discovered categories, you will still want to try for a link first. Even a stretch of a link is going to prove more productive, and we'll see why as this presentation continues. A Zettelkasten has a memory. The memory of a Zettelkasten is expressed in the form of the links. We have downlinks and we have crosslinks, and do we also have uplinks? Suppose we start with the traditional main card. It has a main card number, 3B2. It has a tagline, information from the author, your response, and the source. All the good things that a main card is supposed to have. Well, along comes a new card that chooses this card as its parent. We know how to number it. It's 3B2A. But whether you realize it or not, this is the most typical form of downlink. The downlink takes the form of juxtaposition. This card comes in front of this card, so this is a downlink to this card. No other notation is needed. However, let there come along another card that also chooses this card as a parent. Suddenly, you have sibling rivalry. And the way out of that, as we have seen before, is to have a directory card that leads both child cards together with the parent, all on the same directory card, where the conversation is completely available between all three taglines. But what if card 2C4D-3D could just as well have been the parent of this card? We handled that by creating a directory card for this card and showing a link to 3B2B, the card that could just as well have been its own child. Sometimes I list this just 3B2B and omit the arrow. But as time goes by, I'm being more specific to show that arrow indicating that it's a link, just to make it perfectly clear what I'm talking about there. Now you have a network. Here's your little subtree, and it presumably has a parent. This one also presumably has a parent, and they link to the same card. So now you have the shaping of a network. And presumably it could also have child cards added to it, which would simply add to its directory card. So what is the structure of a Zettelkasten? Well, it's predominantly a tree. In some ways, it's like a forest. because each entry point has its own separate tree that doesn't link anywhere else, and it's somewhat like a network because a given child card could have more than one potential parent. But basically, it's predominantly a tree. Now for our second question, is it a hierarchy? Well, the answer to that one isn't so clear. Maybe, maybe not. It's up to you. Your choices are going to determine the answer to this question. So let me explain what I mean. There are two kinds of choices that could help to shape your Zettelkasten either into or not being a hierarchy. One type is what I call developmental wandering, and the other type is topical unfolding. They're quite different. So let's deal with developmental wandering first. And Chris, I'm thinking of you here. Chris has a new video out, a tour of my odd inks. She is a great fan of fabulous pens and inks, and she just recently put out a video, a tour of my odd inks. One of her viewers watches that video and decides to send her the oddest ink of all, a bottle of cephalopod ink. It's actually a thing. You can look it up on Wiki. Cephalopod ink? Squid ink? Oh yeah. It's really a thing. So now, it's quite natural for Chris to file her bottle of cephalopod ink in with her other ink Zettelkasten cards. But now, do we have a hierarchy? Well, yes, so far still we do, because it's a type of an ink. But now what happens if we come along and we get some other piece of information about a squid? Where would you place it in the Zettelkasten, Chris? I think that if you don't have a nicely developed section on marine biology, you might just want to put it right here next to the squid, because it might be the closest card of contact in your Zettelkasten, in which case your Zettelkasten has begun to wander. It's developed a history of its own, and some amazing little pockets of fun things can develop in the middle of the most unexpected places, and it's really quite delightful. Now, topical unfolding is quite a different matter, and in fact, this is something that goes right back to Roy's question. If you're hesitant to place a detail card for fear that a more general card will come along later, you could get stuck in getting your Zettelkasten started. You'd end up with a whole bunch of unnumbered cards that you're just waiting for that magic lead card to come along to give them all structure. Well, I'm happy to say that a hierarchical structure can evolve from detail to general. And let me show you how. You don't need to be afraid of this. Suppose you have a lovely main card ready to be added to your system about the crossbow. It's got the rest of the tagline and all the other goodies on a main card. And based on its parentage, it belongs at 4C5A. You're a little nervous about it because the crossbow is kind of detailed. But fear not, give it its proper number and put it in your system. Well, sure enough, sooner or later, here comes the general card, medieval weaponry, and all of the stuff you had on the main card for that. Oh no, it's no longer hierarchical. You're going from the detailed to the general. Oh my, oh my. Well, you can either live with it and just let it go with that, or you can use a link. Let me show you how that would work. You would use a directory card for 4C5A-1 medieval weaponry, and just as you would if this were an alternate parent to your crossbow card, you show it as a link to 4C5A, the card that precedes it, and that's just fine. You see, the value of this is that now you show the hierarchy, even though the number wouldn't suggest that it's hierarchical. And then when you add the other types of medieval weaponry that are bound to come along, guess what? All the forms of medieval weaponry are right there, participating equally in this conversation on medieval weaponry. There's no problem at all. Is it hierarchical? Yes and no. It's hierarchical because the directory card demonstrates the hierarchy. The numbering doesn't demonstrate the hierarchy, but who cares? Well, I hope that answers your question, Roy, on the structure of a Zettelkasten, and I hope that sets your mind at ease about not worrying about what order information comes into your Zettelkasten. You can always set up the structure that you want through links, and your directory cards will put all of the correct cards together in a conversation where you can find all of the material that you're looking for when you want it. So let me know if you still have questions or if I missed the mark in answering your question. And otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow. And Kayla, tomorrow it's your turn. Bye-bye.